Okay, so Mason, you have spent a lot of time in the raw food movement. What does a raw food diet look like today, and is it possible to live a long and healthy life while only consuming raw foods?
Cool. So this is one of the things I wanted to really kind of get out of the way, like off the bat. When like the raw food diet, like we talk about diets as if this is something that actually exists in reality. Complete construct, complete tunnel vision whenever you kind of think of the word diet. So raw food diet for me is literally the inclusion of foods that haven't been cooked into the diet. Raw foods, we can cover them off pretty quickly. Foods that haven't been cooked over like roughly 44 degrees. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grasses, seaweeds, fermented foods. These are what raw foods are. So let's quickly have a look at the raw food diet, and as we if we can all kind of have a general understanding that that's a diet where you go, all right, I'm going to go 100% raw foods. Generally, when that is appropriate or when that works is when everyone, when you get to that point when you're like, holy crap, I'm really like, there's something going on in my body. I shouldn't be this tired. I shouldn't be sick right now. I'm going to start taking care of myself. And what kind of happens is you start like looking into your health and you start getting conscious to what's going on in your body. Start entering into that phase of a transitional diet where you transition over from our standard Aussie diet, the SAD diet, and you start going towards that diet of what I call ultimate health, or you start discovering this new culture of health for yourself. For some people at that point, and what's my opinion just based on what I've seen, at that point it's really good to make that diet quite catabolic. You want to be breaking down. So generally at that point, vegan's the best, I find the best way to approach it when you really want the body to be breaking down and letting go and detoxifying all that stuff and all that crap we've accumulated growing up in this society. High raw at that time, or even all raw, is extremely effective as well. You know, look at like what kind of Ann Wigmore's done and that kind of stuff, where they get you to go like hard on the greens, hard on the raw, get rid of all the calories, so naturally meat, dairy, all that, but they even get you going like low on the raw calories as well. So this is really great at stripping down, really great catabolic diet. But then, like, this is like the stigma of the raw food diet, right? When you watch people that have been on that path for way too long, and then they get that look, I call it heroin cheek. and they're like, because like what happens is sometimes you get to a point and they're like, and you hit a wall and you're like, I've got nothing left. I need some meat. And what you need is you need to kind of make that transition from a transitional diet, which is like a quite heavily detoxifying diet, into your maintenance diet, or then you go into the point you just enter into what is your new culture, your new personal culture, which will include your diet. So at that point, some people might realize, say they've gone down that route of going high raw or even 100% raw, they might go at that point, you know what, for me, it really works to be on like raw calorie sources like avocados, nuts, seeds, if the high fat. Well, we're going to get into the whole raw calorie conversation a little bit later. Or they might, need some carbohydrates, some more calories, just some fuel, just something to give them some, to give them a little bit like a bit of meat. Some people might say, I need something cooked. Now, the best thing about raw foods is it really does tap you into your intuition. So like, you go along and you cleanse enough and you get clean enough, all of a sudden you start realizing it. Everyone knows this, right? At some point you get into your heart when you get really clean and you're just like, I know I need that food. And at that point, if you want to stay vegan, if that's like in your ethical code, you might say, I'm going to bring in some sweet potato. I'm going to bring in some quinoa or some of the other delicious gluten-free grains and seeds that you use. Some people might need a little bit of raw dairy or something like that. Whatever it is, like some people might go back and like, intuitively tap into the fact that they might need a little bit of meat. Whatever it is, but I think the raw vegan diet, there is a population of people that will thrive on that diet. They're like, I thrived on 100% raw, pretty much vegan, vegan, I think you'd call me, for quite a lot of bee products. I eat bee products. Yeah. So I'm really into honey. I'm really into bee pollens.
Because bee products aren't actually considered vegan usually. So
from an animal.
They're from an animal. Yeah. So
I love it.
I can go a little bit deeper. I'm aware of the time. I hope that answers the question. So, generally, I think humans can survive on anything. Pretty much. Humans will eat anything. And we've kind of got access to, now that we're a global network, we've got access to everything you need, that if you want to stay raw, you absolutely can. if it's not for you, like if like fundamentally, sometimes you just know, and there's a large percent of the population that fundamentally know that 100% raw diet is not for them. And so at that point, you kind of like start realize, like you start breaking down, all right, what percentage of raw works for me? And I think generally that's going to fall between like the 50 to 90% for the general population.
Very succinct. Does anyone else have anything to answer?
Yeah, no, I like that middle ground. I think it's a good position. And I think it's important to make a distinction between what is healing about a raw diet has its limits. You know, there's a law of diminishing returns. After a certain time, it actually can start depleting you. You can become catabolic and start to eat tissues from the body as a fuel source. And you see people, as you said, get very thin in the cheeks. That's the first place where you start to realize that there's calorie deficiency at the cheeks. And then you start to see it in the arms and so forth, in the extremities of the body. People become very thin there as well. And then into the actual flesh of the torso, around the torso. So yeah, you don't want to go too far down that track for too long. Otherwise, it can have detrimental effects.
I think there's a difference between short-term and long-term approaches to food and eating, and I like the philosophy that you have. It's almost like there's food for medicine, and when we take medicine, there's a certain time period that we want to take that medicine for before we go off that medicine. So if we're eating food for medicine to cleanse ourselves, to become less inflamed, you know, to boost our immune system, all these things, eventually we will get to a point where we're like, okay, we're back on track now, we're at optimal health, what's going to be our longer term? And that's when people may introduce other foods to sustain themselves over time.
Yeah, I could really connect with that personally, because I had to do something radical. I was really sick. I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, and for me it was going raw vegan, and that worked. Initially that worked, you know, and I was probably on it for about 2.5 years. And in that space, you know, I felt great. But there was that point where, as you say, you know, things started to go downhill for me, and I really had to start, you know, reevaluating my diet. And I did. I had to make some changes and things. So for me, it was bringing in some more cooked foods. I'm still vegan today because that works for me. But certainly getting that right balance, as you were saying, you know, we're at what point, you know, 50 to 90. Yeah, what works for you? And once I found that, everything's been great since.